Hello, welcome to another edition of AAU Talks on AAU TV. I am your host, Frank Asefuah, and today we'll be discussing data protection, commercialization of research, and data privacy. And also we'll be talking about intellectual property. To discuss this with me in the studio, I have two wonderful guests with me. I have Mr. Benjamin Cobblah from University of Ghana, and Mr. Emmanuel Sackey of ARIPO. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Nice. Mr. Cobblah, what exactly do you do at University of Ghana, and how does that relate to data security and privacy?
Thank you for the question. Basically, I'm the team lead for IT security and planning. The role basically requires that you secure the data of the university and also plan help plan the university's infrastructure, so that projects don't carry on and on and on and on.
Yes.
And make sure that the projects that are implemented by the university come with some value for money, and it helps the university also to ensure that it is operating efficiently. So that's my role in the university.
Nice. And Mr. Sackey, Emmanuel, please, what is ARIPO and what exactly do you do at ARIPO?
Thank you very much. ARIPO is the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization. We were established some 40 years ago.
Wow.
And we are located in Harare, Zimbabwe. And our main task is to foster creativity and innovation for the economic development of Africa. So we do different things. We do norm setting, advocacy, we register intellectual property rights, we build capacity, and of course we also foster partnerships across Africa. So we are here just to talk about the role of intellectual property in the commercialization of research output.
Wow.
And that's why we're here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Sackey. And again, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you
so much.
Mr. Sackey, you mentioned a little bit about commercialization of research. What exactly is that, and how can African universities use that?
Yeah, let me just first of all start with the notion of intellectual property. Intellectual property is basically the creations of the mind.
The mind, yes.
And I think research has an underpinning focus and purpose for that. So a researcher begins a research, try to find underlying issues, and then that can lead on to some degree of potential value, and then it can lead on to development and of course to commercialization.
Wow.
So the whole process of commercialization is just trying to find a solution to a problem that we face generally in life. So we believe that intellectual property is it plays a pivotal role in any research endeavor. And today, as we are seeing the world emerge, a number of researchers are moving away from the traditional way of conducting research by way of just doing it, to publish articles, by moving towards conducting research and assessing the value of the research output, and then if it has some value, then you use intellectual property tools to protect those research approaches. So these are new dynamics that we are having across Africa, and a number of universities are beginning to develop appropriate policies to reignite the research that they are doing to enable them to have return on investment, which may be coming from public funding or some grants or private investors.
Wow. That sounds very heavy and very good, because institutions usually spend a lot when researches are done, so they need to see the return on investment in order to make sure that they continue doing that, and there's appropriate funds to justify that.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cobblah, I was wondering, since you are the team lead, there will be a lot of issues about privacy with data and accessibility. How exactly do you resolve that, and how can we do that?
Thank you once again. To begin, basically, data has become a very important tool in our institutions, in fact, everywhere.
Yeah.
The amount of data that you have determines the amount of power that you actually
Very
have.
true.
Most of our institutions, in most of our institutions, we have not really gotten down to really understand the kind of data that we control as institutions, as research institutions, and so on. You'd realize that data by itself, I mean, we generate it as we go around. Because of the influx of mobile technology, you generate data even as you walk. Your mobile phone is taking data, your location data, and other things.
Yes.
As you come into the organization, you come in with different technologies, and as aware, these technologies pick up data that sometimes you don't really even know exists. The data that we also pick from sources that we even know. So for educational institutions or research institutions, you are picking data from other institutions coming in. Now, how secure is that data? What's the integrity of that data even before you go in to use it? So even from sourcing the data all the way to its disposal, you need to think through and understand how that data applies to you. Now, the data that you're collecting has personal information related to it. So there are people's names, there are people's identities attached to it, addresses, exactly. Some institutions will mandate that you do a medical before you come into the institution. Those are special personal information that is picked up. Now, how is the data that are being collected, how are they being handled? You understand? The person giving you that data has a right over that data in various aspects. And as an institution or a research person, you need to understand those rights vis-a-vis what consequences if you mishandle the data that's provided to you, the kind of things that you would be asked to face. So you need to understand, even in your entire process of collecting the data, you need to understand what you actually, what are the processes you have in place to ensure that the data that you're collecting, one has the return on investment that is given to you. One, you are protecting the rights of the people that are giving the data to you. You have appropriate safeguards to store and protect the data to ensure that at the end of the day you have value for whatever data you're collecting.
Wow, thank you very much. Now, how can intellectual property be used to safeguard this information that is produced?
Well, thank you once again. As I mentioned, intellectual property has become the engine for transforming research output into a commercial product or service. And so what the role intellectual property plays is that, first of all, it provides it legitimizes the rights. A lot of people say they have rights to some ideas and all that, but there is no legitimacy. So the legitimacy comes through the registration of the rights and acquiring the rights. And there are so many intellectual property tools that can be used to protect different research outputs. If, for example, the research has value towards developing a product, then that research, if it has that value for that, one can apply for a patent or a utility model. And these are purely tools that are used to protect inventions. If the research is something that has been published, today we have what we call voluntary copyright registrations. So you can also apply for some voluntary copyright registrations just to be able to legitimize authorship and ownership of the work. Then if it has something to do with designs and then something to do with plant varieties and the like, we have different intellectual property tools that can be used to do that. So what we are talking to universities and the institutions of higher learning to appreciate is the fact that besides the traditional visibility that they are trying to seek by way of publishing, just to be able to promote and then to become more visible, we are also teaching them to think through usage of the intellectual property system, the rights that I've mentioned, and the benefits they bring to the universities is that the universities are able to license them for other commercial usage, or for others to be able to use that, you know, for either development or for coming up with products. In that approach, then the universities are able to generate income to support further research. And I think that is what the intellectual property system is there for. So we have offices at the regional level, national level, where they enable the researchers to register their rights. So ARIPO, for example, is a regional hub where if you want to register your rights covering more than one country. For example, we are in Ghana, so if a Ghanaian researcher wants to protect his research output through the intellectual property system across Africa, then he can do it through the ARIPO and other regional bodies in Africa. That is how the intellectual property system works.
Wow. That's wonderful. Now, viewers, we'll take a short break and we'll come back. And when we come back, we'll be discussing how universities themselves can also protect their data. We'll be with you shortly.
Cobblah International University, you are the torch that lights above. In you we see a future bright, and by you the nation gaineth from services pure. The emblem that you trust is the message, unique in great and soaring the giants. With such a height of success is true, and with such a size no task is surmountable. Equipped with knowledge, down to earth, we go out of your gates with dignity. May your vision bright and knowledge so above be manifest.
Welcome back to another edition of AAU Talks on AAU TV. We're talking about intellectual property, data protection, and security. We've had a wonderful discussion with our guests, Mr. Emmanuel Sackey and Mr. Benjamin Cobblah of the University of Ghana and ARIPO. We've talked about this protection and commercialization of research. Now, the next question I would like to ask is how universities themselves can protect themselves. Because more often than not, there's a lot of researches that are done, but they go down the drain because these measures, some measures are not taken to curb that flow. So what exactly can universities do in your opinion, Mr. Benjamin Cobblah?
Thank you once again, Frank. Basically, to be able to protect something, you need to know the value of it. Okay. And one of the things that Institute of Higher Learning can put in place is, one, to understand that data is valuable. Most of the researches and things that are done here are mostly sent out of the country because it is funded from donor agencies. The data that we collect sometimes of our students, or the research that is done as project works and things, are sometimes kept on shelves and other things that do not provide value for the country and the economy as a whole. Now, one of the things to understand is to understand the value of data. And if you understand the value of data, then in the first instance, whilst collecting at the source level, you'd require that the data has some form of integrity. So then you go ahead and you classify them according to whatever you want to use it for. Now, because you are talking in the context of both data protection or privacy and security, you need to have some seeming understanding of the laws of your country. In Ghana, we have the data protection law that has been passed, I think it's 2012. That gives certain legal rules. In fact, for you to be able to collect data, you need to be registered with the Data Protection Commission. That's the first key. And just registering is not the best, but registering at least is a first. So after registering, what you need to do is to get some training from the data protection on how you can protect your data legally, because it's both it's a legal requirement of the nation. And then you go ahead to implement. That's the first step. Now, you also need to have classified your data to understand what kinds of data you have and what sources, what is the data flow from source to the time it gets destroyed. Exactly. So in doing that, if you know the data flow, then you can put appropriate safeguards. If depending on the kind of data you have, you can employ technology, which includes putting in like a data loss prevention system to ensure data does not move away from your system or your institutions. You can employ encryption, which are technical tools. You can employ anonymization and pseudonymization and various tools that you can put in place. And these are technical solutions.
Yeah.
Now, there are research reports that tell us that the human being alone constitutes about 74% of data loss within the institutions.
Yeah.
Okay, 74% is a lot of data. So by creating an awareness and training your staff helps to even fight that menace of data loss or protects the data that you have. If your staff is able to decipher the differences between real messages that are sent across the wwws, or is able to identify when somebody is social engineering them, or is able to identify when some form of malicious activity is placed on them or some prank, then at least it saves your organization that chunk. For a number of universities, every year there's a turnover. So some students go, some students come in. And as they come in, they introduce various, those who know would not be at risk. So you need to do some risk assessment as well of where your data is, who is assessing your data, where is it, how is it coming into your system. You need to have a clear view of how this entire process, the entire data life cycle within your institution is actually working. Then you put in the necessary. So you have technical solutions, you have human solutions as well. Then you have the policy issues or the procedures. So what policies are guarding data within the institution? What procedures are there? If I'm I'm employed today, and I'm giving a university machine, a PC or anything to use, what kind of data am I allowed to use? If I'm operating at a sensitive level, so at admissions office, and I'm receiving clients, customers that are students coming through, and I'm picking PI, personal information from other sources. How do I protect that data? Okay, to ensure that the university is safe, because data protection is a legal requirement of the nation. So somebody can actually sue if they want to ensure that, to sue you to get redress if you've infringed on their rights. Okay, so you need to look at the entire frame from sourcing all the way to its disposal, and then put appropriate controls. So you have people controls, you have technology controls, and you have the processes and the policies that you put in place to ensure. So put all three work together to ensure your data is secured.
Mr. Sackey, what is in your opinion is the way we can universities can add on to this protection?
I think that we have, I'm referring to the African Region Intellectual Property Organization, and some other, especially the World Intellectual Property Organization, ARIPO. The studies have been conducted across different countries and in different universities. We just realized that prior to the 80s, there were a lot of universities that were just promoting research for publications. And then we see countries like Israel, United States, post-1980s, putting in place some intellectual property policies in the universities. And then we are beginning to see changes in the intellectual property registration systems. So there are a number of American universities that are churning out intellectual property in addition to publications. So a number of countries are beginning to adopt these approaches. And so what we are teaching African countries to do is to then put in place intellectual property policies in the universities. And these policies, what they do is that they stimulate research and then create incentives for the researchers to be able to continue to do research. And then, as you may be aware, policies normally drive cultural change. So what we want to do also is just once the university put those policies in place, intellectual property policies and strategies. As they implement them, naturally it will drive change on campus. Students will begin to appreciate the need to innovate and also respect other people's IP rights.
Yes.
Mr. Cobblah was mentioning data protection. We do, even in the copyright space, have technological protection measures, which in some cases, because a number of our reading on the digital environment, people are putting in place technological protection measures.
Yes.
So, but all these things can become realized if the universities put in place appropriate policies, as I did mention, intellectual property policies. And we believe if they do so, then we'll begin to see changes probably in the next 5 years, 10 years, regarding the research output, part of it leading to commercialization, which eventually will bring return on investment. So the universities gradually become self-sufficient to be able to promote indigenous research, which we also require to augment our economies.
Yes.
So this is what we believe the universities in Africa should do at this point in time. And so we are calling on all universities across Africa that ARIPO and WIPO, we have developed guidelines for the establishment of institutional intellectual property policies and strategies, and very soon, probably by the end of December, we would organize a regional conference inviting a number of universities in Africa to come for us to go through these policy guidelines so that they can in turn, or the universities can in turn, develop their own institutional policies to drive the change that we all expect to see.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to ask if there are any last words that you'd like to have for the audience, if Mr. Cobblah could begin.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
Yes.
I believe that as institutions of higher learning, we want to show the way in ensuring that data is protected within our organizations. The key is to do that is to ensure that you have people who take care of this data, understand the importance of them, and they have the knowledge to protect them. The institutions should be able to work together. I mean, this organization, this workshop basically was because Cobblah brought most of these institutions together. And I think that Cobblah can spearhead, because they control most of these things, can spearhead the rule so that institutions put things together and actually protect the data that they use, so that data within institutions have the right integrity and the confidentiality that is actually needed for it to be used in further things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sackey.
Well, from my perspective, I think today we are all witnessing the global economies becoming more integrative. And then, as they say, we are in a knowledge-based economy. And in this particular environment where we are currently, it is facilitating collaborative research, networking, and what have you. And for you to be able to do that effectively, you need to always know the borders of what you own. And if you don't define the borders of what you own in the quest for globalization and networking, you lose your what you own. And that is why we are advocating for the intellectual property system to be enhanced in Africa, so that as we interact with other researchers from elsewhere and create the necessary networks and collaborative research that we all desire to have, we would always be able to define what is ours and what is theirs. And in that equation, we generate what we call the win-win situation.
Yes.
But if we don't do that, then eventually we become losers and at the expense of our collaborators. And that is what I believe we should all be mindful of as we work towards developing our economies.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have both of you to discuss this wonderful topic that is important in this information age. And we hope that our viewers at home enjoyed this, and We will be coming back to you shortly with other programs of this series to help you know what data is available, how it must be secured, and the privacy issues that you must also be concerned with. Thank you all for sharing your time with us, and we hope to see you again. Have a good day.